America, my name is Osei-Frimpong, and you are watching The Black Athenians. I come to you every Friday at about 4-ish, a little bit late today. But I try to give you the quality of black politics that you need to make sense of your life. And that's not what we get in schools, and that's not what you get in church, unless you're going to a really good church. And that's not what you get in your family life, but you get it here every Friday at 4 o'clock-ish. And I try to do it from a local Athens, Georgia perspective, but in a way that kind of transports into other aspects. And I'm also a PhD student in philosophy, so we're going to talk a lot about philosophy today. And it's going to hopefully help you make sense of your life and your participation in life and what that means and how you too are a meaningful contribution to this world. But first, I'm going to start off with a story, something you may or may not know. You may or may not know there exist these funguses and bacteria in different animals. Funguses and bacteria, they actually change your behavior and your desires, right? There's only one bacteria that's known to actually affect people. I think it's a fungus, actually, that's been known to affect people. But all the other animals, especially ants, they're parasites that actually change the behavior of their hosts. And they change the behavior of their hosts so that the parasite can reproduce. For example, there's one fungus that makes like crickets jump in and drown themselves because it's the drowned cricket is the perfect fertile environment for the fungus that reproduces and then goes and infects other crickets that then drive crickets crazy so far as they jump themselves. So these funguses actually short circuit your evaluation of risk. And so you do things that are good for the fungus, but not so good for you. It's fascinating. It's also fascinating because there's a political analog, and it's been identified early. Like Plato writes about this in the Republic, about institutions and what they need to be whole, and how you have to think of institutions as organisms with their own reproductive principles. And how do they reproduce themselves? Well, institutions reproduce themselves in a way that might not actually be good for the members of the institutions. And institutions reproduce themselves in a way that actually contort the members' desires. So the institutions have an interest in your desires. It needs you to want to do the sort of thing that's good for the institution. It could either force you or it could get you to want it. And part of what it is to be an organism is to have your own reproductive principle and principle of sustenance. Like these institutions have their reproductive mechanisms and they run through our desires. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and what that means and why we still need institutions in order to be meaningful human beings. But we're going to do that after the opening. So go ahead and hit the beat.
To the beat, y'all. Yeah. Sound good to me. Never change the ways for the world or the government. If I was the president, then I would state facts. You leave it up to me, I'll paint the White House black and ain't no future in your front.
I'm back. All right, so I mentioned before that there are bacteria that actually reproduce by driving their hosts insane. And because of the insane behavior of the host, that creates a quality of fertile reproductive environment for the bacteria. It's not a parasite insofar as it feeds off the host materially. It needs the host to do things. It changes the behavior of the host for its own reproductive success. And people, that's your church, that's your family, that's your school, that's America. And Bobby Wright has this right. I should have just got the clip ready, but I didn't. He says the biggest project in America right now is control of the black mind. And black people, we're losing. Because America survives by controlling the black mind. And the white mind insofar as it has to view black people in a certain way. And it's not the truth. And you have to understand that all of these parasitic institutions are hostile to the truth. So the truth becomes a virus. and the organism that is the political organism has antibodies. We call them cops or other stigmatizing organizations to keep the homeostasis in the body and to expel This is what what's the ISS. That's what we send black kids to in school suspension. They're like, these are all ways that organisms kind of deal with black bodies, political organisms. And it's important to understand that the truth is hostile to all of these political institutions, because the job of the institution is to get you to desire what's good, to get you to function in a way that's good for the institution, not necessarily to function in a way that's good for you. And this is kind of the origin of a lot of midlife crises. They realize that they've been institution people. And if you're an institution person, it turns out that you got all your meaning for the institution, and the institution was organized with its own reproductive sustenance in mind, not necessarily your meaning. So you realize that you've been used. And for a while, you desire to be used. So I'm going to start with a distinction between a part and an organ. Right? An organ is a kind of part, so it's not a sharp distinction between species. It's more part is the genera, and then one kind of part is an organ. A different kind of part is a non-organic part. So you have organic parts and non-organic parts. If you're an organism, that means you're made up of parts that are organs. That means each one of your part serves a different function that's actively reproducing the organism. Right? So you can like heal. You like consume things and then masticate them, and it turns into part of your liver or part of your hand or hair or something like that. Like each one of your parts is an organ insofar as it has a function, and this function is an activity that reproduces and sustains the organism. Now, a part on a non-organism, a non-organic part is different. When the part in your computer breaks, it doesn't heal itself. It just breaks, and the organism will stop, or it'll run until it runs itself out. It's not an organ. It's or the computer or the machine will not heal itself. It'll just break. You need to get a new part because it's not going to heal itself from its own organic power. Right? It's not going to. Your computers don't consume and then make new circuit boards the way people consume and then make new, bones. Right? So an organism can heal and sustain itself, and it does so by like masticating and then pooping out and eating and pooping, and then also the internal work of the organs function so that it sustains the unity of the organism. I hope that, this is an important distinction, but I hope it's clear. A machine part won't do that. It just breaks, and when it breaks, it'll break or grind itself. Your car, when it's out of oil, isn't going to, turn air into oil or whatever, right? The way the car function is that the check oil light comes on, but the check oil light doesn't itself make new oil. Like it tells us to like think about the car, and then we make new oil. So we can personify or we can pretend that the car is an organism, but it doesn't sustain itself the way an organism does. It doesn't sustain itself independently the way an organism does, or even interdependently the way an organism does. And it doesn't have its internal parts that do it. Right? The car needs us in the way that a wild animal doesn't, or even a plant doesn't. Needs us to think about it. Right? So organs sustain themselves through their parts, the functioning of their parts. And this is important because you have to think of political institutions and all institutions as organs and organisms. And the committees in your institution is an organ of the entire organism, which is the institution. That means you need your own reproductive principle. And so you need to have like a structure of formation, and how do I bring people into this organism? And you have to understand that for your organism to be whole, it needs to be able to use power against external threats and be able to have the organs, the parts of the organism, the members, function internally through their own desire, their own internal principle of motion. Right? So the organism can use power against the outside, but internally it can't use power. It needs to have the organs function through their own internal function, through their own internal drive, principle of motion. Excuse me. So that's the difference between an organism and a machine. A machine will just break, not heal itself, not sustain itself. An organism has a principle of reproduction so that it's always healing and always sustaining itself. And so insofar as your institution is an organism, it's doing that. It has a principle of reproduction, and it has a principle of healing and can sustain itself and sustain its integrity. You have to understand, Black people, America is an organism, and Black people, we're a virus. And you have to understand a few things, right? So all of our institutions are organic insofar as they only exist because they have a principle that gets members to either tithe or do whatever to desire to be a functioning part of the organ. So the organ stays, the institution stays through time. And institutions don't die like people do. For an institution, people are like cells. Like they live, they die, but the institution stays. Institutions don't die like people do. Cells die like people do relative to institutions. Right? So in order for an institution to change, there needs to be some sort of massive intervention that changes the logic of the organs inside. That's one reason why, you have to get rid of the people and all the institutional structures and all that if you actually want to change an institution. So in order for an institution to survive, it has an interest in the desires of the members, right? When I teach this in class, I talk about Facebook. What does Facebook do? Well, people think, Facebook brings people together. What's the product of Facebook? Well, social connection is the product of Facebook. No, the product of Facebook is Facebook users. The product of Twitter is Twitter users, which Facebook then sells to the highest bidder. That's the product of Facebook. Apple creates it creates devices. It also creates Apple users and people who choose to use Apple and people who can only use Apple, because I tried to use an Android phone the other day. And you know what? It was hard. I didn't understand what was going on because I'm used to my iPod Touch. I don't have a cell phone, but I do have an iPod Touch that has programmed me to be an Apple iPod Touch guy. And when I tried to use a person to Android, I couldn't. And Apple likes that. Google has programmed you also. That's why if you try to find something using Bing, the first thing you do is think, man, I wish I was on Google. It has programmed you to desire it. Not for your own good, but for Google's sustenance. Right? So all of these institutions have an interest in our desires and will deform our desires away from the truth about their interest in our desires. I'll say that again. All of these institutions have an interest in our desires. They need us to want to function and to behave a certain way. Not just for us to behave a certain way. They need us to want to behave a certain way. Right? And they desire us to want to behave in a certain way because we think it's us doing the desiring and not the institution's influence on us. Remember, the fungus doesn't reproduce by forcing, by some sort of external. The fungus reproduces by internally driving the cricket to want to jump off. Well, crickets don't really have wants; they're kind of biologically driven, so it's not a strict analogy, but you understand. It's like but pathologies work with that. Work in that way with people, right? Like someone who's an alcoholic desires to drink. And insofar as the pathology is a thing, it's governing their desires away from what they would actually want to do. So the pathology, for its existence, needs, bars and all of these other things. But I hope you kind of get what we're talking about. So your church needs you to be a certain kind of church member. Not just one who tithes, but one who doesn't scare away the people who tithe. Right? Like that's very, yeah. When if you're at a university, they are trying their product is like a future donor. It's trying to create the quality of experience that makes you a future donor. A lot of nonprofits get in trouble with this because instead of serving their mission, they focus on the volunteer experience because they need volunteers who give money or treasure or time in order to keep the organization sustaining, even if the mission is to actually eradicate poverty or whatever. Nonprofits are notoriously bad about this because a lot of their missions should be to work themselves out of a job, but yet the people like their jobs. Would you believe the executive directors usually like their jobs and all the staff usually like their jobs? So they are bad at working themselves out of a job in the way that they should, right? So you have to understand that these institutions have designs on you, even if you are indifferent to them. Conservatives, I think, are actually better about this. You listen to conservative radio, and every commercial break will have one commercial out of the 3 or 4 that's like for a security company. Because they know conservatives know that things are out to get them. So it'll be like an internet security, it'll be like for a gun safe or an internet security. It'll always be like a security commercial on your local Fox affiliate. Because conservatives know that things are out to get them and control them. And that kind of fear works. Liberals, I feel don't have that same sensibility. They think that they're in control of their individuality in a way that is naive and it's confusing. All right, so we have a mental health crisis in the United States, but a lot of this mental health crisis comes from people being confused by desires implanted into them by alien institutions, right? People are confused by the things they want or surprised by when they get the things they want, when they get the things that they thought they wanted, it doesn't make them feel meaningful or live a meaningful life because their desires were implanted into them, imputed into them by a complex industry, an institution, or a political regime, even if that institution is the Republican or the Democratic Party. When I talk to students, I say look, the reason you got into this classroom is because you scored very well on your SAT, and the reason you got in this classroom is because you got good grades. It's a little bit suspicious because there are things you did to get those good grades and things you did to get those SAT scores that are maybe a little bit dubious. The things you've done, it makes you do things that you don't want to do or you probably ought not do. So you should have a complicated relationship with your the school's designed to get you addicted to grades. In probably an unhealthy way. There's a healthy regard for grades, but there's also an unhealthy regard for them. Get you addicted to doing well on the SAT and in a way that probably is a little bit too much and probably will not make you happy. And it's probably, you should have gone goofing around with your friends one time, but instead you studied, maybe. So you have to think. The teachers want you to succeed and they want you to do well, but the school also wants you to do well because it has to report your test scores. And if you do well, then the school looks good, right? So there are a lot of investments. And this is also especially interesting with black people or poor people because sometimes the school will talk you out of taking the test because they don't want you to drag down their test scores. Because they have an interest in what you want to do. So they'll talk you out of voluntarily taking the test because they don't want to have to report your test score. Because if the school's test scores go down, then the property rates for everyone go down and the property values for everyone goes down. It gets complicated. So we have to be on the lookout for institutions. All institutions except the perfectly just ones have an interest in you telling yourself some sort of story about the truth relative to that institution. Right? And this is what Plato argues in The Republic. I'm writing a paper on this right now, so it's kind of both fresh and I'm working it out. There's an entire industry in desire management. And it's not just the obvious marketing people. It's everything. Every institution that sustains has an interest in creating members who desire to sustain it. I'll say that again. Every institution that sustains has a reproductive principle that, that governs its interest in creating members who desire to sustain the institution. And that's how institutions outlive its membership, because they've created new members who desire to sustain and participate in the institution. So it's not indifferent to the members' desires. I'll say that again. Institutions are not indifferent to their members' desires. Right? So why don't we just go off the grid? Because you need institutions to be free. You need institutions to be free. You're alone in nature. You're not free. You're prey to whatever bites you and whatever. I mean, I was talking to my buddy, and she was like, the difference between real Africans and Americans? Real Africans know that hippos are dangerous. Americans think that hippos are cuddly. Real Africans don't camp, right? Africans don't camp. They try to get air conditioned. My dad spent 3 generations trying to get here, right? So they don't camp. Americans camp because they don't know that nature kills you or is completely indifferent. So you need institutions in order to be free, because nature itself is completely indifferent as to whether you starve. You need the recognition of other people to accommodate you and recognize you in order for you both to be free, in order for you both to work together. And that's why you need these conventions. You don't even have property in nature. You try to make a property claim against a tiger. No, that's my arm by rights. No, the tiger's going to eat your arm because it wants it. It's biologically determined. So you only have property as an institution between two rational people, and not one who's on under the sway of a pathology. Try to assert your property right against a kleptomaniac. They're not going to respect it. They're going to steal your stuff because they're kleptomaniacs. So property only matters in concert with someone else who recognizes property. Right? This is why toddlers have a hard time with property. Right? They're not that their minds are working. It's that they don't recognize, they're not in the convention of recognizing property. Mine and thine. And then, you can even, then commodities where you can sell them on markets. All of these are institutional structures. Right? All of these are institutional structures. So without institutions, you can't actually do anything free. You're always at the mercy of a completely indifferent world. Because then you're not at the mercy of the institution's interest in your desire. You're at the mercy of the lion's hunger. The lion's desire. You're still in a problem. So you need to create institutions in order to be free, because in order to do anything, you're interacting with a part of the world, and you can't exert your rights claim against a falling rock. But you can do that against a person who's going to punch you. All right. And boxing can have rules in a way that dogfighting can't. Marquis of Queensberry rules, right? Boxing can have rules in the way that dogfighting or cockfighting can't, because they both recognize each other as under the institution of boxing. Good. So both boxers recognize each other under the institution of boxing. So in order to have a meaningful life, you need to be part of an institution, and to be a meaningful part, a functioning part of the institution, you need to not be interchangeable with other parts, with other people. So you need to be unique and in your function in the institution, not necessarily interchangeable with anybody, or you won't live a meaningful life. People will have nothing particular to say about you at your funeral. But you also need to be part of the institution. You just need to be part of the institution in a different way. One of the reasons I like watching women's soccer, especially the U.S. women's national team, they all have such different games, like Tobin Heath will beat you one-on-one. Whereas like Roosevelt, you think that's her game too? No, she'll beat like an entire defensive line. She'll get them all out of position. It's like everyone in Carly Lloyd, her thing is she comes out of nowhere. Half the time you spend the game thinking, where did Carly Lloyd come from? I don't know. She just came out of nowhere and scored a goal. That's her thing. She comes out of nowhere. It's fascinating. I don't know what defensive do to that. So like they're like you need to be, but they're all members of the same team. But they're all unique members of the same team. They all play not just different positions, but they all play the positions differently. So they're all kind of unique individuals in that way. And I think that's kind of a beautiful thing about the women's national team in soccer. But just in meaning in your life, think in order to be meaningful, I need to actually participate in an institution, but I need to be a unique member of the institution. So I can't have the institution stamp me so much that I am like everyone else in a meaningful way. Right? So you need institutions for people to be free and meaningful, but understand that the institution has an interest in your desire, so you can't be eaten by the institution. So that usually means you need some sort of say in the institutional structure. So it's not an alien that's like manipulating your desires. It's you manipulating yourself, which, you know, is usually a pretty good thing. That's why that's why people have personal trainers, right? They're putting themselves in an institutional relationship with someone who's going to make them better by fighting against them. Or why you sign, like, I don't know, why you run marathons and you do things that you can't quit in order to force yourself to do it. So like the institutional pull allows you to be a certain kind of person. So you need the institution, but the institution has an interest on your desire. And if you don't have a say in that interest, then it's just the institution manipulating your desire. You're just a tool of the institution. Hope that makes sense. I hope like you get the difference between an organism and a machine. An organism, its organs function to keep the organic unity whole. A machine, a part breaks, it just breaks. It doesn't fix itself. It doesn't have its own logic, right? And you have to understand institutions are organisms. And black people, that's especially important because in America, we're like the appendix or we're the tail. No, we're the vestigial tail. We're vestigial people. Vestigial? Not vestigial. It's vestigial. We're the vestigial Americans. Maybe Native Americans are also vestigial Americans. But black people are vestigial Americans. We used to have a purpose, but like I don't know if we do anymore. So I don't know if we'll be missed. We're like the appendix. They could take us out. We're here as long as we don't rupture anything. But as soon as we rupture anything, they have no problem taking us out. So I hope this has been helpful for you to think about your relationship with institutions. We need them in order to do anything meaningful, because we need that mutual recognition, the structure of mutual recognition. And the institution needs us to desire to function in a way that's good for the institution. It needs us to be a part. But you also know that this is why blue chip athletes probably shouldn't ask their coach about academic advice, right? Because the coach is part of the institution of football, and the blue chip athlete, like the coach is going to tell you what's good for the football team, not going to tell you what's necessarily good for you. And one more time, I want to reiterate what this has to do with mental health. We have a mental health crisis because we've been casual about the way desires are imputed into people in a way that leads them to live meaningless lives and then get confused about these desires that they can't make sense of. Right? So your marriage, your family, your church, your job, all has its own stake in you. Right? And unless you negotiate that stake, it might not have anything to do with you. All right, so maybe your answer isn't pills, but better politics. And with that, I'm going to let you go. What time are we at? 29, 30 minutes. Good. Now, hey, look, if you like what I do, and I think you should because I do it pretty well, you should send this to all of your friends. And you should subscribe. Hit that bell. Subscribe. Tell your friends. Watch this for your next little book club, because not all you guys read the book anyway. And maybe you could take a day off your Sunday school and watch this instead, and then talk about what Jesus has to say about what I'm saying. Also, you understand that Jesus himself, and this is why a lot of good people who actually care about truth and goodness end up in jail, because jail is the body's defense system, is the political organism's defense system for people who care about truth, because the institution has designs on your desires which are good for the institution and might not be good for yourself. So it's going to distort your vision of truth to fit its needs and for sustenance, right? So hope this has been helpful. Tell your friends. Also, if you really like what I'm doing, actually, if you just kind of like what I'm doing, you think it's useful, go ahead and go over to thefunkyacademic.com and kick down, either one big donation or sign up for a monthly, a $5, $15, or $50 monthly donation. Because I rent this studio, this equipment costs money, and I'd like to pay people a little bit more. I get Matthew here during the school year, but I'd like to give him a raise. He's been doing good work for me. And my kids got cello lessons now. Like it's like I have needs, and I spend a lot of time, on the show and thinking about what I could do for you guys. All right, thank you for your time. Peace. I'll see you next week.